Good morning. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Yud Gimel, Amud Bet, 4 lines down from the top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Schut Refuah Shalema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya. She have full recovery. Nisan Bat Nisim Bat Ben Miriam Shav Refuah Shalema, and also Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid. That she have full recovery. Refuah Shalema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated by the Shea family, Kohen family, Dayan families. Should be an ultimate schut for all the mishpachot Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. So we are discussing and continuing the discussion of what is kasher and what is not kasher when you have bundles on top of their sukkah. So the Mishnah said that the bundles are not okay because gezerat otzar, because you're concerned that a person is trying to store away things that they bring from the field. Again, remember, back in the day, people had fields. That's the 98% of the society was agricultural, and they would come and they would just dump the bundles on top of their sukkah as storage, not to be on the way. And out of sukkah, they say, you know what? Let's just, it's all kasher. But because they put it up there not as chach, that would be taseh v'lo minas. So it's pasul. So we mentioned the gezrav otzasa. Hence, any bundle is questionable. So the Gemara said, well, we're not so concerned about bundles that are for mechira, for sale, because nobody is going to keep them as bundles. They're only bundled to tell you this is 5 pieces, this is 10 pieces, the 15, 20 pieces. It's for sales, and people do not keep those bundled once they buy it. They open them, therefore we don't have gezerat otzar. We also mentioned that if you have a branch or a bush that in one end of it is attached and then it branches out from the stem, that also is considered one piece, and bundling one piece is okay. So even if you bring back all the top of the branches together and you tie them on the top, even though that you tie 10 pieces together, it would be still kasher because they're really one. They grew as one bush, as one growth out of the ground, and that is considered one piece. One piece you cannot bundle. Now we went through a whole machloket of Tanaim, what is considered exactly a bundle minimum. And we said it turned out to be that according to Chachamim, already 2 is considered a bundle that you can't have. Now, the Gemara is going to say there is another aspect to be considered. There are multiple different things the Gemara discusses as the explanation of how different businesses worked. And today we're going to start with bird catchers, right? Well, that was a business. You had to catch birds, whether it is for korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash, whether it is for the meat that they used to use from these birds. And says the Gemara, 4th line from the top of the Amud, Amar Rab Abba Hani Srifi de Urbani. The bird catchers had a problem. Of course, they can't be visible to the birds because they're going to run away. So what they used to do was they would take branches of palm tree and tie them from the top together, right? A very tight and strong tie on the top, and then the branches are coming down, and the person would be inside. Now, in order for it not to fall apart easily, they would also thread in branches of palm, right, leaves of palm, inside the bottom piece as well, just to keep it together. But that was not a strong tie. The top is really what's keeping it together. That's a real knot, real kesher that is keeping them together. And now you have this sarif, it looks like a kippah, right? And inside of it, unbeknownst to the poor batbach birds, is going to be this bird catcher that is waiting to catch these birds, right? So now this, can you take this and dump it on top of the sukkah when it comes time for Sukkot? Absolutely not, because they're bundled together. Now, how about if I just opened the bottom ones? The bottom string that goes through the bottom of the branch, or just the top one. Keep one and open the other one. So it says, Rav Abba, Hani Srifi Durpani. These hiding areas that they make with palm branches, Kevan Shutra Rashe Ma'adanim Shelahen, it itself as it is pasul. But once you open the top knot, that kesher on the top, which is the strong one keeping it together, once you open that, you're good to go. Says, well, wait a second. Still, they're agud, they're still bundled, they're threaded together from the bottom as well. How about that? So Papa says, enachinami. We're opening that as well. We're opening everything, right? Which would leave you thinking, what's the chidush then, right? Amar Papa, the shari lehu. He's opening those as well. Rav Huna says no. Rav Huna b'red Rav Yeshua, Amar afilu tema de lo shari lehu. Even if you don't open the thread from the bottom, still is kasher. Even though that they're threaded with each other, they're kind of bundled, still is kasher. Why? If you have a bundle, if you have a tie, if you have a knot that is not strong enough to be carried with it, it's not considered a knot, right? Okay, you have this in many halachot. For instance, like, it could be as simple as a challah on Shabbat, right? You need, for lechem mishneh, you need a full bread, right? What's considered a full bread? Sometimes you have an amateur wife or a daughter that's learning how to braid chalot, and it's kind of like falling apart. There is like a spelt, healthy challah that doesn't have gluten enough, and then it's kind of like falling apart. So if it's half cut, when is it considered a full challah, lechem shalem, for lechem mishneh or not? Well, if you pick it up with the other end, it's considered, it's still attached together. Here's a very similar idea. If you could carry this thing without the knot falling apart, it is considered attached together. But says the Gemara, if you open the top tie and knot, then the bottom thread that goes through it is not strong at all. You pick up the thing and the whole thing falls apart, and that leaf that's going through is going to completely be dismantled on its own. So therefore, even though that it looks to you as it's threaded together, but it's not considered a tie, it's not considered a bundle, because it's not strong enough to be picked up with it as a whole. So says the Gemara, kol eged, any bundle, any tie, any knot, she'eno asur letalto, that's not strong enough to carry it, lav shme eged. It's not considered an eged, and therefore, hence in this case, it will be, of course, a problem. So it says, meaning a problem for it not to be considered eged, and therefore it's kasher for Succah. So it says the Gemara, Amar Abba Amar Shmuel. Yerakot she'amru chachamim. Now, remember, yesterday we had an offshoot tangent going to Ilchot Pesach, which had nothing to do, we just brought it because of the Manda Amar, of who it was, because we learned a different halakha. So we said, merorita de agama, right? The maror that grows into a swamp, into agam is kasher or not kasher, right? That was just a pure offshoot tangent, had nothing to do with Hilchot Sukkah. Now we're going to discuss actually Hilchot Pesach, which has to do with the halachot of Sukkah and Sukkah.
What about a mat? The mats you buy? But in Home Depot, those ones are bundled up, tied, threaded, and you can lift them up and they stay together.
So very good. You're saying basically, why is that not considered a bundle, right? Why is the schach that we have nowadays not considered a bundle? Here we have a bundled thing together, right? And still, the simple reason is because it's not a bundle, it's a mat. In other words, it's not meant to be used as a bundle together. It's meant to be used flat. It's just keeping the pieces together, right? And therefore, it's not what Chazal had in mind. Just like a bundle that you buy for numbers is kasher, the Gemara said, because you're going to open it. Here also, you're going to open it. It's not going to be bundled. You don't put, a bamboo mat as a roll on top of your schach. You open it, and therefore, it's going to be kasher as well. This is a simple reason. There are other elements to it as well. Now, for now, we're going to get to that Be'ezrat Hashem as the sugya unfolds, pun intended. So says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Yerakot she'amru chachamim adam yotzei b'hen yedei v'chorato b'Pesach. The vegetables that you could use on Pesach for maror, in other words, these are edibles, right? That's the point. It's edible, and edible things usually are pasul because they are mekal tuma, right? Ochel is mekal tuma. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Says the Gemara, they have different halachot when it comes to schach of Sukkah. We're going to discuss number of them, 3 halachot. Says the Gemara, One is mevi'in et hatum'ah. When you mix schach with them, on one end, under these, let's call it lettuce, okay? Just for our discussion purposes. You have all these lettuce leaves on top of the schach, and on one end of this, you have a corpse. On the other end of it, you have Adam or Keli, whatever it is. Well, you're not touching the corpse, you're not touching the tum'ah source, but this is considered an ohel that's mevi et hatum'ah. It's considered a schach, midoraita. We talk about fresh, nice, crispy leaves of the lettuce, right? If they're dry, they're not. But we're talking about fresh leaves. Fresh leaves, you made the whole schach with them. On one end of it is a corpse underneath, and the other end of it is me. I become tameh without touching it because of tumat ohel, because this is considered on deoraita level a conduit of tumah through ohel. Fine. Says the Gemara. Second halacha. Ve'en chotzesin bifnei hatumah. But we don't consider it a chotz. Usually, when you have an ohel, you remember we discussed this before 3 pages ago, that when you have an ohel, right, if this is considered an ohel for underneath, it also is considered a divider to stop the tum'ah, to keep the tum'ah beneath its cavity, and it does not poke out the tum'ah to make something on top of the schach tameh. So therefore, if you have a proper schach, if you have a proper roofing, right, and you have a corpse underneath, the tumah stays over here, hovers around here. Anything underneath this becomes tameh, given that this has one tefach and one tefach, it has enough size. And if you have something directly on top of the corpse, on top of the schach, it doesn't become tameh. That's the usual. By this case, you have the lettuce. Something on top of the lettuce is going to become tameh. The tumah pokes, pierces through this and makes anything that's above it also tameh if they're mekabel tumah. Why? That's a gezerah midrabanan. It's a gezerah midrabanan because these leaves are very flimsy and flaky, and therefore, if they dry out, they all fall apart, and therefore we don't deal with it in the Rabbanan level, on a rabbinic level, we don't deal with it as a solid piece of schach. And that's the Rabbanan. So therefore, mideoraita, anything that's underneath it, as it is a fresh piece of lettuce leaf, is going to become tameh. But with the Rabbanan, also the things that are on top of it will become tameh as well. Says the Gemara. Uposlin, the third and final halacha, it says over here, poslin besukkah mishum avir. And there will be a problem for schach. Now, you'll say, wait a second, Rabbi, of course there's going to be a problem for schach because they are. Say it. They're ochel, they're food. Fine. But what is the halacha of a schach that's mekabel tumah? If I have schach that's mekabel tumah in the corner of my sukkah, how much of schach pasul do I have to have for it to be a problem? 4 tfachim, right? 4 tfachim. What do you say?
I said majority.
Well, yeah, I was saying that's when it's mixed, right? When you have a board, a metal piece on top of my schach. If I have a metal piece running through the top of my schach, but it's just this wide, it's okay. Just don't sit underneath it. You're good to go, right? It's not. The sukkah is not pasul. But if I have a schach pasul, going across, again, we're not discussing dofarakuma, we're not discussing those things right now, right? The shi'ur of schach pasul on top of my schach is 4 tfachim. Now, how about if I have air? I just left it empty. Then the shi'ur is 3 tfachim. Right? 3 tfachim open air is considered a problem if it goes across the whole thing up to the kula. So says the Gemara, this lettuce leaves were vegetation that you put on top of the schach, even though they say, well, that's the schach basul, it's good, right now it's good, right? because it's fresh, nice, crispy leaves of lettuce. So I have less than 4 tfachim, I should be good to go. My sukkah should be kasher. I'm not going to sit under it. He says, oh, no. As soon as you have 3 tfachim of that, the whole sukkah is questionable. Why? Because we deal with them as if they're not there. And if they would not be there, what would I have? Air. What's the shiur of air? Avir. Posel besukkah b'shlosha tfachim. 3 tfachim and you're in trouble. Why do I consider this avir? Because you know what happens after a day? They crumble up and they fall in and it's gone. So we already deal with it as if it's dried, because it's going to become dried, and you're not going to be thinking because you're serving your mother-in-law in the sukkah, and therefore you're going to forget about that. And Chazal, to begin with, said anything that's going to be, crumbling down and falling in, we deal with it as though it's not there already to begin with. So says the Gemara, therefore, Poslin besukkah mishum avir. The psul that they have, it's not a psul of schach pasul, which would be 4 tfachim, but it's poslin besukkah mishum avir, which is with merely having 3 tfachim width of this leaves of vegetation of lettuce, you already have a schach that's pasul. So meaning a sukkah that becomes questionable. So it says, why is that? Once they dry up, they flake and they fall in, we already deal with them as though they're not there. And if they will not be there, what would be there? Air. And air is posel b'shlosha tfachim. So says the Gemara. V'amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna.
Does this apply even like before it shrivels up? You put it up that day?
This moment is pasul already. When they're fresh, you just cut them off the ground, still is going to be the same halacha. Right? Because when they dry, it's going to be this. We already deal with them like that.
Now that we had other things that are kosher, kosher schach, we said some of these leaves, they shrivel up. We said you can't use those.
Very similar to this.
So it's also from the immediate time, even though today they're full.
Meaning what we are saying is, in regards to the Gemara we had earlier on the first line of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, right? The shita of Abaye that says that those hizmi vehigi, they're pasul. The Gemara said Abaye said because the leaves fall down, it's even in a scenario that without leaves you would have still more schach. Then more shade than sun, still is possible because that's just uncomfortable. It's not because of this. But if you would have type of schach that when the leaves fall, and they do fall, and then you don't have more shade, then you'll have this problem, obviously, as well. So it says, now we're going to go into, deep into a Tuma Atara Sugya until the next Mishnah, which are important information going through Shas, not just for Masechet Sukkah. It happens to be very relevant to our discussion here, but is also relevant to everywhere. To Halachot of Tumah V'Tahara, Netilat Yadayim, and so on and so forth. This is from Masechet Uktzin, which is the last set of Mishnah in the entire Mishnayot. Masechet Uktzin discusses what exactly is considered tameh when talking about food that come with attachments. In other words, you have a cluster of grapes. So we understand that the cluster of grape is mekabel tumah, because even though that it's the grapes that's food, but the cluster is attached to it. You want it to be attached to it, and so the whole thing is considered a food, right? And same is with any fruit that comes with a handle, right? You want it to be attached, and therefore it makes it easy to carry it, to handle it, to protect it, right? When you harvest your grain, and the grain is in the shells that come with a stem, and you want it to be like that because you want to carry them like that. All of that is considered batel, even though that the hay, the straw that's attached to the grain, is not food. I'm not going to eat them. So why should it be? It's like pshutekli. It's not mekabel tuma in and of itself, but it becomes mekabel tuma in its attachment with the food because I want it to be there. And so long as I want it to be there, it is batel, it is nullified to the halachot of the food. Hence, if it touches a corpse with the end of the hay, imagine you have a stem of a hay like this, and just the top piece is a giv'ol, it is the produce, the actual wheat or barley, whatever it is that's attached to it. Now this end of it touches a dead body, this becomes tameh. Even though this doesn't touch anything and it's not under the oil, still becomes tameh, right? Or if this becomes tameh, and the end of the hay is touching a kli, a vessel, right? The whole thing becomes tameh through, it becomes a conduit for tum'ah, and it becomes completely like the halachot of the food itself. And the reason, and that is considered in the Mishnah or in uktzin. Uktzin means the ends, the handle, right? The handle of kelim, because midoraita, what becomes tameh? Midoraita, there are three things that are susceptible to tum'ah: adam, a person; keli, a vessel; and food, ochel. Other things are not susceptible to tum'ah. Gamarnu, right? That is simple. Uktzin simplified, right? Now, Uktzin, Masechet Uktzin, discusses the fact that it's not just these three, but anything that becomes batel to these three also becomes the din of that. So hence, if you have a kli, and then you have a handle that's attached to the kli, you want the handle for a kli. The handle is not a kli itself, but the handle is serving the kli, hence it's batel and nullified the kli, hence he has the halachot of the kli. Right? An it's a attachment of the food. Right? The hay that's attached, the stem that's attached to the giv'ol, by itself is nothing. It does not, shouldn't become tameh, but it's attached and you want it to be there, it becomes batel because it's part and parcel of it. So far so good, right? Now, there is an exception to this. The exception is if I don't want this to be there, right? There are times I really don't want this to be there. I don't. And if I don't want it to be there, then it's not, I don't need the food. I don't need it. I just need the stem. I couldn't care less about the fruit being there. I really couldn't care less. I even don't want it to be there. So then what? Then will we be prepared to say that now the fruit is batel to the stem, and the whole thing is now mekabel tuma? You know why this makes a big difference for our sugya? Well, it can make a difference for many different sugyas. For our sugyas, I want to cut this branches of wine, but it happens to have some grapes and clusters of grape attach it. Well, it's nice for design, but I don't care. I don't want them to be there. It actually attracts some bugs, right? The real professionals, they have plastic decorations for their sukkah, right? Even though that's a minhag Israel to have the 7 minim in the sukkah hanging, many people, because they don't want the bugs there, right? I was actually at the Sudan, if I could open the parentheses here in Eretz Israel, like, so it's like, a very fancy from Suda. Those who know where I was, they know. And I was sitting there, and they have centerpieces of massive flowers and things going there. So I come sit there. I look at the next person next to me. I'm like, I'm very concerned about this. And they have like dips already ready on the table, and as if he was in process to work, min hashamayim. 30 seconds later, I see something blackish drop on my plate that's empty, and I look close. I'm a bug doctor who worked for many years in this, and it's a very small dead fly that fell from one of the flowers with leaves that were hanging there. And I showed it to people. It's like, this is, who knows how many of these have fallen inside the dips that we would not be able to see, right? And that was the end of my eating things that was on the table for that night. Just couldn't. But this happens to be for the schach as well. So if you have this, and I don't really want the fruit, I just want the stems. So in certain cases, that becomes actually the halacha. that the entire thing is not Mekabel Tuma, and if it's not Mekabel Tuma, it's growth from the ground, not Mekabel Tuma. The Mishnah in Yud Aleph that we had, the two requirements for Schach is Gidulo min HaKarka, it grows from the ground, and it's not Mekabel Tuma, right? So I have these things, Gidulo min HaKarka, not Mekabel Tuma, check, check, we good to go, right? But if you say that this is Batel to the fruit, then the whole thing is Mekabel Tuma, and then really you're stuck, right? So we're going to go through this, and the Gemara's discussion is primarily going to focus on if my machshava alone is sufficient, or do I need to do something to show that I don't care about this? If my machshava, when I cut this off the ground, I didn't want the fruit, I didn't want the produce, I just wanted the branches, I just wanted the stem. That is it enough by itself, or is it not enough by itself? Where do you draw a line? That's going to be our sugya until the next Mishnah, right?
The fact that you put it up on your sukkah, you're not planning to eat it.
Well, soon we're going to see that's not so simple,
Okay.
right? First of all, you could have changed your mind. Secondly, if you say that my mindset is not good enough, I need a maaseh, so then we're really stuck to begin with, right? So says the Gemara. Let's take a look. V'amar Rav, Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna, habotzer legat. If you are picking clusters of grape, but you're keeping it for what? You're not selling it in the shuk to people to take to the Shabbat table. You are going to be crushing this to grape juice, making wine, right? En lo yadot. This doesn't have the halachot of yadot. That means the attachments to this cluster of grape are all not mekabel tuma. If that touches a dead body, the grapes are good to go. As long as the grapes didn't touch it, you're good to go. Right? Why? Because obviously, you don't want these things to be part of the grape. The last thing you want is you're offering a drink of wine to somebody and they have it and then the chupchiks come to your mouth, right? You don't want it to be part of the grape. Right? You want the grape by itself, and you don't really want the yadot, the wood, the stems that are attached, and you mamash don't want them to be there. So therefore, understandably, if your kavanah when you did the harvest was for wine, then they're not halachically attached, and therefore it's not a conduit for tum'ah, as we mentioned before. Now this is case number one. Rabotai, you have to remember the names over here, who's saying what, right? So this so far is Rabbi Abba in the name of Rav Huna, right? Now the second person is Rav Menasya bar Gada Amar Rav Huna. So both are students of Rav Huna, so we'll call them as Rabbi Abba and Rav Menasya, right?
What does Gada mean?
Sorry?
What does Gada mean?
This is his name, right? Rav Menasya bar Gada. Amar Rav Huna. Hakoser leschach. Now, if you are cutting off bundles of wheat, of produce, and you have the stem and you have the giv'ol of the produce on top, says the Gemara, if you are cutting it off, harvesting it for schach, because we're going to put these bundles on top, not bundles, but put these on top of your schach and create a schach, ein lo yadot. It's good to go. Because the hay, the stem, is not mekabel tum'ah, is not batel to the produce, to the grains. Why? Because when I cut it, I don't care about the fruits. I don't care about the produce, the wheat or the barley, whatever it is. I'm not eating it. I'm putting it on top of the schach. I just need the stem, right? So Rabbi Nassi says it is kasher. It's not mekabel tum'ah, right? Now the Gemara says, we're going to finish with this in the middle, kind of leave it for tomorrow. But says the Gemara, Mandamar Kotzer, the Gemara is going to say why is two different examples necessary? Do we need both Rab Abba and Rab Nasya? And Gemara says yes, because the case of Rav Abba, which is the grapes, that is simple, straightforward. Nobody argues that this is going to be a case of mekabel tum'ah for the attachments for the stem because, according to everybody, you want this to be off. You don't want it to be part of the fruit. But the case of the stem and for the hay, for the produce, is not so simple. Because you kind of want the fruits, the actual produce to be there because it makes the whole stem heavy. Right? Straw is very light. If you have straw without anything attached, without grain attached to it, one wind and poof, the whole thing is gone. So you kind of want the produce, the grains to be there attached because it holds it down by making it heavier. So maybe the other mandamar would not agree with this case. Rav Abba would not agree with this case of Rav Manasseh maybe, but Rav Manasseh for sure would agree with the case of Rav Abba, which is going to be now the platform. Now we have a ready platform to discuss the halachot of Sukkah when it comes to this issue of Kabbalat Tum'ah, which Be'ezrat Hashem will continue and will complete in the next shiur. Hazaku Baruch.